Hey guys, this your High Fist here with another juicy topic as part of November's Ruthan Badd Rampage. I usually start these videos by saying thank you to Steven Erikson for sharing and commenting or almost commenting on my videos, but we have a bit of a first. This time I'd like to thank Steven Erikson for neither sharing nor commenting on my last video, but for doing something far more monumental by doing something which now immortalizes the legend of Ruthan Badd. Steven Erikson wrote a sequel of sorts. Well, sequel, epilogue, postscript, right? As my buddy Steve mentioned, you can see it however you want. It's a type of sequel, as far as I'm concerned, to Atlas Shrugged, and he dedicated it to me. I'm not going to ruin the story. All I'll say is go to Erikson's Facebook page and check it out. It's one of those stories where it's very important for you to read it in one go. It's quite a small piece. So make sure you read it in one unbroken stretch and enjoy. So thank you, Steven Erikson, for gifting me the boon of immortality. So I figured I can't just return from such glory with an ordinary video. It has to be something which is worthy of a Malazan celebrity like me. I'm basically Erikson's adopted son at this point. So I'm here with a video so juicy, guys, that you would think it was eco-genocide of some sort. I am here to convince you that everything most of you know about Tehol Bedict is wrong. As in, whenever fans discuss Tehol, what do we usually hear? Oh, Tehol and Bug, haha, they're so funny. They remind me of P.G. Wodehouse. They remind me of Terry Pratchett. I laughed out loud, blah, blah, blah. And while all of this is true, once we peel back the surface, what we see is the most diabolical, calculating, compassionless, in some ways even sinister characters in the entire series, if not in epic fantasy. The Wodehousian humor is so effective as a cloak that despite it staring at us right in our faces, none of us grasp the true extent of how diabolical Tehol is. I don't use the word diabolical loosely. It's not just said to be provocative. The word diabolical is used only to refer to three characters in the entire series: Shadow Throne, Leoman of the Flails, and Tehol Bedict. It's not a word that Erikson uses loosely, and it cannot be a coincidence that the people he uses it for are all one thing on the surface and something else entirely more horrifying underneath. There's one scene where Krupp is referred to as diabolical, but it's more of a joke where someone's scolding one of his daughters and they're like, oh, you're diabolical father, blah, blah, blah. But if you want to include him in that, that's fine, because even with Krupp, there's so much going on underneath the surface. And that's my point. With Shadow Throne, there's the explicit question of whether he's a genius or a madman under the surface. With Leoman during the siege of Yucatan, we see the true extent of the monster residing inside him. And Krupp is just a mystery, as I was saying. So why would Tehol be any different? Is Tehol some kind of exception to this rule? Or is there a far more frightening and terrifying side to him that most of us miss? This was the question that made me go hunting. And what I found chilled me to the bones, because I had always seen Tehol, one of my favorite characters, as predominantly a comedic character as well. But I felt like Casa all along after uncovering the secret, and it turns out to be a folklore assail which just beats me up and turns one of my friends into a dog. My perspective on Tehol has changed a lot since I started working on this video. Tehol is without a doubt one of the scariest and most nihilistic figures in not just the Malazan books but in the genre. Much like how his buffoonery tricks the kingdom of Lether into seeing him as nothing more than a joke, even though he's secretly the wealthiest man alive, we as the readers fall prey to the same trick even without realizing it. As in, we as the readers are so charmed and carried away by the silliness and the absurdity of the humor that even when he shows us his real face numerous times, We just see past it and we go, oh, ha ha ha, that Tehol, he's so funny. Let me break this down since I'm making a lot of claims, obviously. Let's look at what Tehol is doing in the story plot wise. He is essentially an agent of chaos in the story, and his ultimate aim, as you all know, is to plunge Lether into anarchy and bring down all the existing systems, which makes him quite destructive to begin with. Now, I know what some of you might say, but Lether's an extremely oppressive society. He's breaking the chains of debt. He's doing it so all the slaves can be free. He's Robin Hood, blah, blah, blah. And that's precisely the argument he makes whenever he needs to justify that position in that way. But the suspicious thing with Tehol is that depending who he speaks to, the rationale always seems to be different. So, for instance, when he speaks to Bryce, he talks about his family and especially his mother, who was also a genius. And he says she could have done what he was doing right now, but she didn't want to because she had kids, the Beddick brothers, and she didn't want her kids to grow up in the ashes that she created. So she was intellectually capable of triggering that collapse, but couldn't because of her children. And Tehol makes it look like he's carrying on her will in some way. And he even tells Bryce that all the Beddick brothers are honoring their parents in their own way. This is a touching scene on the surface if we take it as it is. There's nothing suspicious about it, right? If anything, it shows us that Tehol has a sense of humanity to him, right? But when we look at Tehol's own inner monologues, we get none of that. And that's what's suspicious. In fact, when we get inside Tehol's head, we get the opposite. We get the sense that this guy doesn't care, that it's all a game to him. Here's a quote from early on in Midnight Tides when Tehol starts getting busy again. He says, and I quote, "Life had been better, simpler, only a few weeks ago, when he'd been without plans, schemes, goals, without, in short, purpose. So whenever we see inside his mind, he's far more interested in doing what he pleases. We never see him internally caring about the plight of the oppressed or even memories of his parents. He uses those as arguments whenever he is in conversation to justify his own position, but we never see that when we are in his head. In fact, whenever we are in his head, it's much more obvious, as I was saying, that he doesn't care. It all seems to be sport to him, and they all seem to be pawns to him whenever we see things from his perspective. Let me give you another example. In his introductory scene in the series, he has an internal monologue about oppression, which really shows how he sees the world. This is what he says. Our civilization thrives on stupidity, and it only took a sliver of cleverness to tap that idiot vein and drink deep of the riches. Comforting, if slightly depressing. So this is a funny line, and most of us would have chuckled when we read it. But look at how Erikson slips in the complexity of Tehol's morality, and look at how he masks it as a joke. Tehol's essentially saying, look, our civilization thrives on stupidity, and anyone clever enough to exploit that will exploit it and can exploit it. And notice what he says at the end. Comforting, if slightly depressing. As in this bleak picture that he paints, while it's slightly sad, that is the state of affairs, ultimately, to someone like Tehol, this arrangement is comforting and what he wants, because he's poised to exploit and take care of himself whenever and wherever he wants. One of the really tangible lines about his morality comes towards the end of Reaper's Gale, where Tehol sends Bug to default on his debt and is about to plunge Lether into economic chaos. Bug gets into an argument with the lawyer where he finally reveals what Tehol's intention is. And he says, look, Tehol just wants all the masks removed because the game that Tehol is playing doesn't have winners and losers. In Tehol's game, you're all losers and you will all be forced to shed your illusions, to take off your masks. That's what he says. This unmasking metaphor is used more than once in reference to Tehol's schemes. And that's what he wants. He's seen through the matrix. He's seen that none of this means anything. Currency means nothing. And he has great lines about what a scam the concept of currency is. Debt means nothing unless you have the means to collect. Civilization itself means nothing if it has to operate under a facade. And Tehol's main motive is to shatter this facade, even if it means bringing about an economic apocalypse for all the innocent day to day people who are caught in the crossfire. He never regrets it either. At no point in the story does he ever contemplate whether destroying Lethari society was something he should or shouldn't do. If anything, he always seems to have answers ready for why he's right to do what he's doing. As I was saying, even those reasons seem to suspiciously change based on whoever he's talking to at the moment. As strange as this sounds, the only comparable person I can think of in fiction is the Joker, especially Frank Miller's interpretation in The Killing Joke, which was a huge inspiration for the Heath Ledger performance as well. So that version of the Joker is very popular, but completely different from what we saw in the recent movie or the Jack Nicholson version or other comic writers themselves. But this version is known for his extreme nihilism. He believes in dispelling illusions, in removing masks, in shattering society so that it can come face to face with its true nature. And that's one of those things which makes this version of the Joker terrifying, as it does Tehol, because that is chaotic evil in its purest form. Someone who wants to bring the entire system down because the disguise, the mask, is no longer good enough for some individuals. The parallels don't end there either. Another trait which makes the Joker so scary is his complete inability to be broken with physical beatings. There are numerous instances in the comics, cartoons, movies, blah, 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 where Batman beats the shit out of the Joker and the Joker's just laughing because he doesn't care. And he finds all of this too funny to care. And surprisingly, look at both scenes where Tehol's life is in actual physical danger. We sort of notice this dynamic in Midnight Tides when a bunch of Edur thugs kick him to near death, and the next time in Reaper's Gale, it's Karos Invictad, where Tehol shows absolutely no fear towards death. And even as they are beating him up, for example, even as the Edur soldiers beat him up, he makes sarcastic remarks about them. Even as Karos Invictad beats him up with his scepter, he roasts and mocks Karos Invictad. And much like the Joker and Batman, Tehol even mocks Karos Invictad for not having a sense of humor, the way the Joker mocks Batman for not having a sense of humor. Yes, guys, I compared Batman with Karos Invictad. Sue me. Anyway, going back to how you can't break Tehol physically or mentally, recall the scene in Midnight Tides where he meets the Ratcatchers Guild and explains the plot to them. They're like, no way. If what you're saying is true, you are the most dangerous man in Lether. And they're all shocked when they realize that he is telling them the truth. And they think that it might be better to kill him, but he talks his way out of it by including them in the plan. And the way he does it shows how clever and diabolical he is. He says, listen, I've already set things in motion. It's too late to stop it. Everything's going down. If you kill me, everybody, including yourselves, will go down as well. But if you team up with me, then you can escape intact. And he kind of uses that to talk his way out, as he does in more or less every situation. Almost every situation in which he's confronted with some kind of danger or issue, Tehol is more than capable of talking his way out of it. Speaking of the Ratcatchers Guild, Erikson gives another hint here as well about illusions and masks and so on, with us finding out that the entire Ratcatchers Guild is just a bunch of illusions. So why don't we see through this illusion, the Tehol illusion? If it's all as obvious as I'm saying, why is it that we miss it? And here again we come to the point of masking it in humor. Tehol and Bug are constantly doing heartless things, but we don't realize it since we are laughing along with them. Remember that scene where the big fish, the capybara or whatever, is out of the canal and it's gasping and dying while the two of them have a conversation about whether it should be saved? And by the time they're done with the conversation, the fish is dead. And Tehol's like, oh well, whatever, let's just take it home, we can eat it, right? It's funny, but look at the total lack of compassion in that scene. And there are many scenes like that where Tehol completely shows how devoid of compassion he is, and we're just laughing. Erickson sometimes doesn't even use subtlety. Sometimes he just tells us this outright. There's a conversation he has with Janat, where she finds out what he's been up to and where she finds out what his plan is. And this conversation has many of the most important pieces of Tehol's true nature. Because for the first time, he's not trying to be sarcastic or witty in a defensive way. He's not trying to rationalize his schemes. He's just sharing his honest thoughts with Janat. Because number one, he knows he has to be gentle in terms of her own healing and mental ability. So he decides not to feed her bullshit like everyone else. And secondly, he also likes her in a unique way, a way in which he doesn't like anyone else. So he takes off his mask for the first time in this conversation. And when she finds out about his plan, she says, you know, Tehol Bedict, I never imagined you for an agent of evil. To which he says, there are all kinds of evil, Janat. This is the point of my video right here, captured by Erickson in 2 lines while I require more than 20 minutes. Janat says, I never imagined you for an agent of evil. Many sort of like you and I probably would have thought the same thing. I never thought of Tehol as an evil character, as a dark, terrifying character. And to that, Tehol himself says, there are all kinds of evil, which would be my reply to you as well. Evil is not just the demon with the glistening fangs. It's not just the sadistic murderer. It's not just figures like Karos Invicta and Kala. There are many kinds of evil. Some of them can be charming and witty and funny as well. And those include Tehol. And the fact that he's saying this in reference to himself in his first honest conversation in the series, that should tell us a lot about the truth behind Tehol Bedict. He is acknowledging that he is indeed one kind of evil. In the same conversation, they also discuss the pros and cons of what he's doing. And Janat says, look, I admit that the existing system isn't any better, but you would lose the moral high ground if you stoop to their level and do what they did. And Tehol casually replies, I have never claimed a moral high ground. So he says, look, I never said I was a good guy. Why did you assume that? I've never once claimed that. The most dangerous type of evil, some might say, is evil that willingly and cheerfully admits that it's evil, where it doesn't even pretend to be good. It can't even pretend to put on the mask, and neither does Tehol. He is more than willing to admit that thousands, if not more, will die because of his scheme, but he never claims to be the good guy or he's doing it for some moral cause or whatever to himself. And this makes him even more dangerous than his enemies. He says it himself. He says, look, this trait of mine, where I don't really claim to be the good guy, this sets me apart from my enemies. So he knows that this heartless, cold quality in him is useful, and he weaponizes it willingly. Deep down inside, he's always known that his apathy towards everything, his moral nihilism, is a weapon that his enemies cannot deal with. And this is the real impact of his mother in his life. Go back and reread the conversation with Bryce. What he's saying is that his mother had the same power, but she cared too much. She had too many things that she cared about, like her children. And because of this, she could never use that power. But he can now use it because he cares about nobody. He's cold enough to do it, to pull the plug on the entire kingdom. Now, of course, you can interject here and say, hey, hold on. But Tehol stopped himself the first time. And he stopped himself during the invasion of the Tea Stealer as well. He put his plan on hold. And you could use this to argue that he's quite a nice guy. But let's look at it under the surface again. Why didn't he pull the plug the first time? He certainly kept all his interests as they were, and he was ready to do it all over again when he needed to. The way I see it is, it's kind of like how serial killers, we sometimes find out during their childhoods, they killed a cat or a dog or some kind of pet just to see what it was like to get that kill. That was Tehol, the first time he almost crashed the economy. He had a taste of it. A lot of people ended up losing a lot of money, including the queen, and he tasted his first bit of blood. And then during the Edur War, the reason he halts the operation is because doing it then would not serve his purpose. As in, doing this during the war with the Edur would not help in unmasking civilization. It wouldn't help in making society come face to face with its true nature without illusion. And that's why he doesn't do it when the Edur come. He makes that very clear in his conversation with the four sisters. Let me just go back to the final quote I have from that Tehol Janat scene. They have this long back and forth, and he breaks down why morals and ethics are meaningless, blah, blah, blah. And he ends it by saying, "Yet my heart breaks for a naked hen," because there's some slapstick, absurdist humor involving the hens and stuff while all of this is going on. And while it's hilarious, look at how well it captures the moral contradiction of Tehol. One of the sort of contradictions is that on these major moral and philosophical issues, he has no heart. But as far as day-to-day life goes, we do see him just being a regular guy and a nice guy who's nice to people. That's crystallized so well with him embarking on this long lecture about the meaninglessness of everything and sort of ending it with, "Yet my heart breaks for a naked hen." As in, despite all that cosmic nihilism, I can still be compassionate about the small things. There are two final points that I'd like to highlight. There are quite a few quotes where he seems to have a certain disdain for humanity. Of course, we have that in the line about civilization thriving on stupidity, which I mentioned earlier. But he often compares human beings to chicken, to rats, even to insects. This is symbolized by him naming his two-headed insect pet after the name of the Letheri king Esgara, as in the rightful name for this insect is the name of the human king, which is itself another interesting look into Tehol's perspective, because in Midnight Tides and in the beginning of Reaper's Gale, he's always like, "Oh, Esgara, my precious pet," and he seems to care about it and even tells Buck to take care of it. But the instant he comes up with a scheme to troll Karos Invictad, he ships that bug away as part of the puzzle, where Karos could have just squished it if he had wanted. I know it's just an insect, but all of this happens way too consistently with Tehol for it to be a pattern, where his words reflect a certain warmth towards a person, but his actions simply don't. For instance, even when he finds out that Chalas or whatever, the old man who died saving him, even when he finds out that he died, we never see Tehol regretting or grieving or revisiting stuff like that at all. So much so that it comes to the point where we do need to ask ourselves, so is he this way because he's the comic relief and therefore can't be melancholic for the tone of the story? Or is there something more sinister going on? And that brings me to my final point, which is a small one, but an interesting one, which is that Tehol, for whatever reason, sometimes seems to be aware of a fourth wall type dynamic with the audience. And I'm not talking about metafiction and things like that beyond my intellectual grasp. I mean something simpler. Tehol sometimes acts like he's a character on a television show who knows he's a character. Not in terms of winking at the audience and stuff, but with his theatrics. For example, there's a funny scene where the women are all brawling in his bar, the Trample Peacock, and him and Bug are being ushered out. And Erickson says Tehol brushed imaginary dust with his hands. And there's another scene where he's trying to teach Ublala Pang about how to skulk around, and he's like, "Look, you've got to look around suspiciously," and things like that. So he has these theatrical moments like that. It's almost like he knows he's a character in a story being watched by us as the audience, and he knows that he has an illusion of himself to present to us whenever he's on the page. And this is the meta trick that Erickson plays on us. Okay, I guess I'm going to talk about metafiction. So the meta trick that even while we are laughing at the literary people for mistaking Tehol to be the comic relief, Erikson is laughing at us for mistaking Tehol to be the comic relief. This is why Bug is with him. Even Bug respects his audacity, his nihilism, his self-centeredness, the grandeur of his chaos, right? And look at how frightening and powerful Tehol is, where even Bug starts learning from him and the fate of the universe changes because of that. Just as how Tehol pretends to be doing nothing while scheming behind the scenes, Bug then starts playing a proactive role in the war between the gods. And there's a great scene where the other gods realize that while Mile has been pretending to do nothing, he's actually become the most powerful god now, mirroring what Tehol did in Lether. Tehol's megalomania is so pure and there's so much substance to it, therefore, that even an elder god chooses to call him master. And the fact that he does all this without having any powers, is what adds an extra layer of danger to him. Tehol doesn't need warrants. He doesn't need sorcery. His ability to scheme makes it sort of all insignificant. And once again, to make that Joker comparison, the Joker isn't anywhere nearly as strong as every other Batman villain. Almost every Batman villain could beat the crap out of the Joker. But none of them will never be as frightening as him because of that worldview, because of their ability to see the bigger picture and realize that burning down the entire picture wouldn't be such a bad thing after all, because of the sort of inability to be intimidated and broken by physical punishment. And finally, on the issue of masks, just a quick note. Red Mask, who also appears in Reaper's Gale, tries to put on a mask to bring down Lether. Tehol tries to pull off all the masks in order to bring down Lether. The former fails while the latter wins. So that was my basic argument, guys. I hope that wasn't too long. Those are my reasons for why I consider Tehol to be the most frightening figure in the series. He's not the type of guy who would throw a fireball and destroy an entire kingdom. It's his intelligence and cynicism that makes him that way. And what makes this terrifying beyond all else is that it's all out in the open and we never see it because we're too distracted by the humor. It's kind of like the Joker, where he tries to present this grotesquely humorous side with a sinister layer underneath. Whereas with Tehol, the external persona as the Joker works so well that we completely bite and we don't see the horror that lies underneath. So Erikson's essentially given us the Joker, but he's peppered it with so many hilarious gags that we think it's Bertie Wooster. And that, my loyal subscribers, means that we have one more person for whom we can use the word diabolical, and that's Steven Erikson. Take care, guys, and your high fist will see you soon.